The What to Read Next podcast helps you build a TBR of future favorite books. In each episode, Lauren and Maine interviews authors and book influencers to recommend books they loved for you to pick up today. If you're an avid reader, always looking for your next great read, then the show's for you. Hi, Christi. Welcome to What to Read Next podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and talking romance with you.
I am very excited to have you here. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, so I always say that when people ask, one of the words I use to describe myself is prolific. I've been writing really since grad school. I went to the University of Connecticut and I was a history ed major. And that's when I always knew that I wanted to write romance novels, but my path to publication wasn't necessarily the path that you necessarily think you're going to take. You know, I'd wanted to have the agent and, the traditional contract, and my path was definitely slower. And I ended up, my path it fell into it a little bit. I was on bed rest for 17 weeks with a really complicated twin pregnancy.
Oh my gosh.
And, and I started writing seriously when my son was born. And when he was born, I learned he had a disability. And so writing books are an escape for all of us. I was in a position financially where I couldn't afford books. So I used my libraries and I wrote my own books, and it was very therapeutic. But I never did anything with them. I was still kind of just trying to pursue that traditional path, and until I was on bed rest. And so at that point, I was really bored, and I had had watched an episode of Say Yes to the Dress. I don't know if you've ever seen that show, but Valerie Bowman, who's a Regency romance author, was on, and she was picking out her wedding dress. And if you haven't seen that episode, it's a great one
Now I need to look for that episode.
I love Valerie. So I was watching it, and and she's like, I'm a romance author, and I'm like, and it jogged it. And I had just binged a lot of TV because there's only so much you could do. Mm-hmm. And then I'm like, hey, I have all these books on my computer, and so I'm like, yeah, I'll just publish them and indie publish and see, and maybe I'll find a reader. And and I ended up, my first book in my series had ended up hitting the USA Today bestseller list. And then I never stopped writing. And so I'm, more than 70 books in. And so, about a few years after that, Montlake Romance, which is an arm of Amazon Publishing, reached out and asked if I'd like to do a series with them. And then I did that. And so only recently I have just had my first experience in the more traditional, New York sphere with my All the Duke's Sin series, which is mass market published, and really exciting because, you always dream to hold your book in your hand. And it was nice to be able to go into a store and see it on the shelf and have my daughters there with me to see it too. And, and kind of like come full circle.
Yeah, and you're in the Berkeley family, so so I love that. Oh my gosh, I love this idea. Honestly, just seeing that show and that trigger to say hey, let me give this a try, because maybe this route did not work right now. It can work eventually. You just never know. It's just take one action. Just follow the crumbs. That's why I like to say it. Follow the breadcrumbs. It'll lead you to where you need to go next.
Yes, I love that. That's great.
So let's chat about you're a prolific writer. So how do you manage it all? How do you write? Do you write all the time? What's your schedule looks like?
So, if you had asked me pre-pandemic what my schedule had looked like, life had been more standard normal of what we thought life looked like. And so my girls had been in preschool and in school, and my son was in school. So I would work all day. When I dropped them off, I would work the traditional school day, and then I'd work at night too. And when they went to bed, and it was, I was writing 10 or 12 hour days. And I love to write. So it's not it's not, for me, it's not sitting down, it's a chore. I enjoy what I do. And it's, I always say that, if you're I think of myself more as a storyteller kind of than, and author, like there's always just, it's, there's stories everywhere kind of for me. And so, but when the pandemic hit, my kids are home, and, we're in a position of teaching 3 children at home. And like I mentioned, 2 of my children have special needs and 1 is severely disabled. So there was no, there's no respite, and there's no, so I had to kind of go through this evolution and a shift. So there were several authors. One of my, we call it accountability partner is, her name is LaQuette, and she's a contemporary romance author, and very similar, a mom as well. And we started writing, started at night, and then, your day is just so full. So we created a new schedule where we would set our alarms and write at 4:30 in the morning or 4 in the morning. So every day I wake up, at 4, and I will write until about 7:30 while my kids are sleeping. And in that time, I've learned that I'm more productive just with those few short hours as opposed to the 10 to 12, because the house is so quiet, because nothing has happened in the news cycle. I mean, well, everything's always happening, but it's not like, there's kind of this process before the world catches fire every time, the time that it usually does during the normal 9 to 5, 9 to 9 kind of shift. So, it's just quiet. There's no noise. There's just nothing. There's just this great silence. And it's been really, it really feeds the muse. There's just your thoughts. And, it's not like emails to respond to at that time necessarily, because, most people aren't sending emails at 4 in the morning. And so, yeah, so that's really my writing schedule now. And I do it daily. I really committed to, like, I adjusted my life a lot with, put a lot of, life in perspective. And, and my weekends I give to my, my family. And, unless I'm on deadline and, I have edits that I have to turn in, I try not to really work on the weekend unless, my kids have something that like they have to do for school, and then I'll sit and we'll kind of work together like that if it's something that I could do for. But no, I could pretty much just, that's my week, and it's rigorous. Like that's my schedule, that's my routine, and it works, and I don't waver, and I write a lot of words, like 4,000 words a day.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. That's amazing.
What peace and quiet can do.
Yeah. With peace and quiet, and just like not having any distractions, like just removing the distraction and just be like, just write it, like get it out.
Completely. And and then the other, I think it's the Pomodoro method was, and I had never heard of it really until I'd started, working with my critique partners, or the writing accountability partners. But it's, you're on for 25 minutes, you're off for 5 minutes. So that's also been so helpful, because I can still go on social media, but I know at 5, when that 5 minutes are up, we're like, okay, back to it. And, and reporting, how many words did you do? And it's not a competition. It's just, again, it's putting out that it's there, that accountability, and
So I got a question, because I've interviewed a lot of indie authors who were in the regular contemporary dark, very niche market, but historical romance is like, it's not as wide in indies, So what was the experience being an indie with historical romance, like promoting, marketing, because you get to do the whole work,
It's a lot. So it's, I didn't really appreciate just how much work the indie publishing was until I was with a publisher who, coordinates all the pieces and the details of, the cover and, the book blurb. Like, I'd rather write 100,000 word book than write a 250-page blurb for the back of my book. Like, there's an email sitting there, my editor's like, I just need the quick blurb. And I'm like, I'd rather just send you the whole book that's almost done right now. But, so for indie publishing, it's everything. And at first it's all I knew. So it's, kind of, and so the that work day is is a lot because, you're responsible for your blog tours and you're responsible for your marketing. Um, but there's also something freeing in that too, because you have control of it too. So it's these trade-offs. And for me, I enjoy both. So that's why hybrid really works for me. But it's work.
Yeah, it's work. It's a lot of like, it's just like a day to day. Like you're gonna manage all the different logistics, manage
Yeah.
all the different, all the
Right.
different parts and pieces,
Right, because it's not just edits, right? So it's, it's developmental edits, and then it's a
the
second round
proofread.
of dev edits, and then it's the proofread, and then it's the copy, right? So there's just so many stages of editing with just, within that. And it's not like you use the same person for each editorial stage, right? You have different proofreaders. And so coordinating all those schedules and, making sure that you are on the books, and then, and you I'm trying to find wood to knock on, but like missing deadlines is not something that I do. And, it's something that I've really prided myself on, and, making sure that my books are turned in. And, sometimes you can't help life, I've had really times that it's been challenging. But, with indie publishing, you are working with contracted people who are relying on your income as well. So it's, being respectful of these editors whom you're working with. And, so you can't necessarily say, hey, do I, like that they have their schedule in the same way. So it kind of requires, maybe that's kind of why I never thought about it, but why I have committed to these, deadlines, because the people that you're working with are relying on you to do that too, because otherwise your book doesn't get edited. And
and then it delays, and then
right,
and then you'll hear from readers and be like, where's my book?
exactly, right. And they will, right.
It's not the money, it's just like you get the readers here like, where's my book? I don't understand, you owe me a book.
Yes. And like disappointing readers is like one of, obviously the last thing that, we don't want disappointed readers. We love that people are excited and passionate about our worlds, and letting them down is never something that we want to do, ever.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about Desperately Seeking a Duchess. Tell us the elevator pitch.
All right. So, so Cortland is, so of just overview of the series. So all the Duke's sins, the way that I pitched it when I was presenting it to Berkeley is imagine if you had the Bridgertons, but they were all illegitimate. And, it's this very close family, and they're from a mining town. And so, a lot of my books, most of my books are reflective of my experience. I talked often about, my family struggled with poverty, and we were, when my son was born and we lost, we had to lose it. We lost our home, and we really struggled, and we relied on charities and family. And so my books are very much characters. It's, I always say it's the fairy tale, but, it's the fairy tale for the people who are, who've struggled, who have survived, abuse or, assault, or who's, soldiers with PTSD and, working class characters. And so in this case, it's the Audley family, and they're miners. And so it's this merger of this family who's had no idea, no intention of ever entering polite society, who suddenly finds themselves thrust into this, glittering, world that is so different than what they've known. And the idea that they don't want to necessarily be part of that world. And so with this particular book, the heroine, Kaylin, this is something that we had talked about, when I was talking with my editor, and, when it was in development, is that, people say, oh, well, she could be a duchess, right? Why would she, she lives in a mining town and the hero of the book is a duke. So doesn't that match automatically make sense? Isn't that something that, but then you looked at, the coming from her working class station that, her brother was the foreman and she had greater freedoms there than she would. And that, she's kind of traded some of these freedoms, more of these freedoms for this kind of gilded cage. And so she has no interest in going until the Duke comes, the hero, who's Cortland. He's an identical twin. And so his brother is her father's man of affairs. And the Duke is like her brother, the hero's brother is just methodical and just very direct, and he's not the charmer. Like Cortland he's a rogue and he can, get ladies to do any, well, not I guess not like that, but he could, he's good with his persuasion. And so it makes sense. He's like, I'll go, she'll never know. And so he goes there and he presents this idea of a world for her. He realizes that she has this one book there and he realizes that she's interested in natural science. And he, starts speaking to her of like, you can go to the museums. And so he paints this world and then, and she goes there. And then she's like, this is not what I signed up for. And then she sees him and it's actually his identical twin. And he's cold and he's not at all the charmer. And she's like, what is happening here? But she's able to piece together pretty quickly, even though they're identical, that this is not the same guy. Yeah. And so there's a lot of, and he's so charming and he has a big family and they both come from these big loving families, which is, something familiar that I write about. Like for me, families and big families are something that I love, and noisy, boisterous, and his sisters are troublesome and he plays pretend swords and soldiers with his sisters, and so his problem is he's in need of a fortune and she's an heiress and he just does not want to be a fortune hunter. He really is head over head over toes is what he says for her. And, she'd had her heart broken before. So it's kind of a reversal. A lot of times we see the hero and he, he's had his heart broken, but this guy is not. He doesn't know he's never met anyone like her. And she's like, I've had my heart broken. I don't want to, but they form a real friendship. And so, I've seen like, they talk about slow burn. And so some people say this is a slow burn, but, I always talk about like friendships and relationships. And, for me, my husband is my best friend. We've been together since he was 15 and I was 17. Right. And so, you learn that the relationships, because he's my friend, we've been able to weather being, poor and the hardest things of, our son having multiple surgeries. And like, it's important that, I always say there's passion. And that's what, we love in our romance novels. But man, when life is hard and when you're in lockdown, and, the whole world falls apart, you want your friend at your side. And that's really who the hero and the heroine of this book are, friends and lovers. So, yeah.
I love this. Oh, so readers can pick up this book because it's already out.
Yes. That's the good thing, right?
That is a good thing. So pick up this book. So let's chat about so what's your reading journey, like reading romance journey? Did you grow up reading it or late in life? What was it like?
Okay, so I grew up reading it. 13 years old, I was at my aunt's apartment in Rocky Hill, Connecticut, and I could still see it. She had a coffee table, and on their coffee table was Jude Devereaux's Eternity, and it was like a mail order bride story, and it was this gorgeous cover with like, remember how it was like the embossed, like raised flowers?
Yeah.
Like, what is this? And so I picked it up and I read that. And I was like, that was it. Like, and so I was 13. And so I read it and my mind was blown. And she had such an extensive backlist of materials, in romance in, the early 90s, and then, going back into the 80s was she did medieval, and she did, Western, and, Regency, was different. But I was like, I am only reading Jude Devereaux, and I binged everything. I remember like going to the bookstore, and because I would get gift cards for like Christmas from my family, buying all the books. And I still remember the day that I was done. And I'm like, what do I do now? And like, it felt like a betrayal because, at the time I'm like, I can only read one author. And then I discovered Julie Garwood.
Yeah.
Like The Gift and The Secret. And I could just, her Scottish romance. And I'm like, I didn't think there could be anyone better than Jude Devereaux. And then I'm like, Julie Garwood. And then, and then I moved over to Judith McNaught. And then I realized, I'm like, oh, it's not just like that there's only one amazing romance author. It's just that they're all amazing. It's just romance is amazing. And so I never stopped reading it. And, I had a love of history, and it was the period. Like I've always had an interest in the period. And so, it made sense when I went to college that I was going to go for history.
Mhm.
And, I grew up in a very working class town, and I was the first woman in my family to go to college. So for me, I was going to be a teacher, right? Like that was, we'd, but I wanted to write. And so I, remember just even talking to my parents, and they were always supportive, but we were also, like, you got to feed, how are you going to, you could survive as a teacher, and you could still write because you get summers off, which we all know is the biggest fallacy of the world, right? Like, like teachers get all this, but you don't. And so I ended up, reading and writing when I was a teacher, like at, when I should have been sleeping, because it was the only way to do it. But and so I never looked back. And it was, and then, to be honest, I also read outside my genre. I'm a huge Jodi Picoult fan. Like I like to be ripped apart when I read, like, because I guess I torture myself like that, but she just guts me. And I like to just like, Me Before You, Jojo Moyes, like, and people are like, you read, wait, what? Like, you love happily ever afters. And I like I like to craft them. And I love the idea that you could, there's going to be the guaranteed happily ever after. But I also love having this feeling of just having my heart ripped out too, because I'm perverse like that, I guess, and like to punish myself. But I think it's good to feel that emotion, and because that's life too, right? Like, to have your heart just,
ripped apart.
Make
it right.
Exactly.
It is so good. So do you have any books you recommend our listeners to pick up?
So I cannot recommend enough. So I mentioned LaQuette, who's my accountability partner, and she writes contemporary, and she writes for several different lines, but the series of hers that I'm currently reading, so she has a book that's out, One Night Expectations, and it's this family, it's the Devereaux Ranch, and there's a grandfather, and he's this patriarch, and and it's very much like my jam. Like, he's interfering, but in a good way, which is similar to the Duke of Bentley in my series. But he's, there's this misunderstanding, and he's trying to bring his family together. And so, LaQuette does a really good job of, like, her books are so sexy, and they're really emotional too. Like, she just paints such a beautiful world. And so I haven't read her One Night Expectation yet. So that's on my list. And I'm trying to think, Stacey Reed's to think of the title. She has it. It's out at the end of June. A Matter of Temptation.
Yeah.
That's on my Goodreads list as well. And I'm a huge Stacey Reid fan. I had the opportunity to blurb her, and that I always, I always, you get, sometimes requests, and authors will reach out, and it's like, I love, right. Like it's like, cause I've had to do it. It's like, oh, I'm sorry to ask, kind of. And cause that people are, but Stacey Reid, I'm like, oh, please. Yes, definitely. So I had the opportunity, to read her, one of her works in advance. And so I love Stacey's work. And, I'm in the middle of editing, and I have to turn in my last Berkeley book of the series, the third. Well, no, it's the third in the series, not the last, but that's due in September. So my summer is now trying to juggle, right? Because now everybody's home. So I'm like, editing, which, like I said to you, I would rather write a brand new book than edit a book. Everybody's like, edit. I'm like, I know they're important. I know they're good. I know that it's essential. It's kind of like, going to the dentist. Like, I'm not a fan of the dentist, but I know that I need to do it and that it's important for me. And that's kind of like edits too. I hope my editors don't care that I said that about compared edits to the dentist. But there we are.
It is so good. It's just like, there's some parts that you love, and some parts that you're like, okay, yeah, I can't.
Yes.
It's have to bear
Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome. Christi, tell us where we can find you online.
Okay, so you can find me at my website, which is christicaldwell.com. I'm also very visible on Facebook. I'm newer to Instagram, which I'm probably dating myself. I'm on Twitter a lot as well. Yeah, so you can find me there. And I don't know if I've mentioned, I took up baking during the pandemic too. Ooh. And I became like a baker of cakes because it's just fun. So, if you're interested in not only books, but looking at the latest cakes that I've created.
Yes, I am definitely looking at that.
It's I always say it's like, it takes me, weeks and weeks to write a book, and a cake. I'm a real slow baker, but I'm good at it, but it takes me a long time, but it still doesn't take as long as it does to write a book. So I can see the product and I have fun. So it's like creative, and my kids get to eat it. So it's like everybody wins.
Gold star. You get a gold star after you finish it.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Christi, for being on the show.
No, thank you so much for having me. I loved chatting with you, so I appreciate it.
If you enjoyed this podcast, feel free to share with friends, subscribe, rate, and review the show. This is the easiest way to support the podcast. For a list of books mentioned and other romance recommendations, please visit watchrenextblog.com. Did you know you can purchase audiobooks directly from your favorite local bookstore? With Libra.fm, you can pick up more than 250,000 audiobooks, including bestsellers and recommendations from real booksellers. You'll get the same audiobooks at the same price as the largest audiobook company, you know the name, but you'll be part of a different story, one that supports the local community. If you're new to audiobooks, they're the perfect way to squeeze more reading into your busy life. Listen with the free Libra.fm app while you do your chores, walk the dog, relax at home. If you already love audiobooks and don't know what to listen next, check out recommendations from people who know the best booksellers. The Watch Read Next podcast has a special offer for our listeners. Get two audiobooks on Libra.fm for the price of one with your first month membership. Use code WatchReadNext. The offer is valid only for new members in Canada and the US. The Watch Read Next podcast is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Please visit frolic.media/podcast to discover new shows to tune in. Thank you so much for listening, and have a great day.